Okay, this screencast, what I'm going to do is cover the effects of acid deposition. So the key understandings that you need to know for this unit is outlining the causes, which we did in a previous screencast. And in this case, we're going to be actually looking at the effects of acid deposition on soil, water, and living organisms. All right, so let's take a look at that. I'm going to just forward to that slide. All right, so effects of acid deposition. You need to be able to outline and give examples for direct effects and indirect effects, but the indirect effects will include both toxic and nutrient effects. And we're going to mostly be focusing on ecosystems, but I'll explain a little bit more on societies near the end. All right, so first of all, just looking at a coniferous forest, say maybe a forest here in the Czech Republic, acid rain has direct effects because the acid will damage the leaves, and it actually impacts chlorophyll, and it will degrade the waxy cuticle, and kill the leaf in various places, and it makes it less able to photosynthesize. Okay, so that's a direct effect. It's damaging the leaves, it's damaging the chlorophyll, thinning the waxy cuticle, and it makes it so the plant can't photosynthesize as much as possible, reduces productivity all around, right? The other thing the acid can directly do is it can directly kill soil microbes. Okay, so soil microbes, those symbiotic microbes that are important in nitrogen fixation and other, nutrient cycling. Well, if those get killed by the acid because they might not be tolerant, then that's another direct effect. All right, and that's going to lead us to indirect effects. So the indirect effects on coniferous forest is, first of all, the indirect nutrient effects. If the acid directly killed the symbiotic microbes in the soil, then that's going to mean there's less nutrients available for the trees, okay? And so that's going to make fewer nutrients available because the acid's killing the microbes. And the acidity actually will also, because acids react with metals, and it will leach nutrients such as calcium, magnesium, and potassium ions, making fewer available to the trees as well. So other types of nutrients that it might need. Okay, so the toxic effects has to also do with that because it's releasing those metal ions. And aluminum ions are a really big deal because when those get released from the soil in these acidic situations, then those aluminum ions actually can be quite toxic for the plant. It damages the root hairs, which are these little teeny tiny roots that are responsible for most of the water absorption and nutrient absorption for the plant. So that aluminum ions damaging the roots, that's a toxic effect for the plant. Okay, so an indirect nutrient effect is the loss of nutrients because it's killed the microbes that they have symbiotic relationships with for nutrient cycling, and also it can leach important nutrients out like calcium, magnesium, and potassium. The indirect toxic effects are the aluminum ions that are going to be released into the soil, which damage the roots of the trees. Now, that's for a coniferous forest. Let's take a look at what happens when all this acid precipitation runs off and ends up in aquatic ecosystems. So in aquatic ecosystems, when acid rain leaches into lakes, it can lower the pH of the water. This can happen in streams too, but mostly lakes are the biggest deal. And it can directly affect organisms that are not tolerant to lower pH levels. So you can see here's a little graph showing the tolerance range of a lot of different organisms. So you can see, mayfly nymphs, and mussels and things like that, they don't do well in the lower pHs. You're not going to see them down here. In fact, in a really acidic lake, you're going to find this organism called the water boatman. Not sure what that is. Looks like perch can kind of handle a little bit more acidic, but again, once you start getting into the less than 5, you're going to be losing a lot of organisms. Okay. So directly affecting organisms that are not tolerant to lower pH levels. Okay. Because every organism has like a tolerance level. All right, and then the indirect toxic effects are when aluminum ions wash into the water. Those aluminum ions that were toxic to the roots of the trees, those are also going to be toxic to fish. And in fact, this is a really big deal. Those aluminum ions make it really hard for them to osmoregulate, to be able to keep the right balance of salt and water concentrations in its body, and that ultimately leads to death of many fish. So you'll see a lot of trout and other important fish in food production systems can be lost. Okay, so that's aquatic ecosystems. Now, other effects, there can be direct damage to limestone buildings and statues that might be of archaeological and historic value. And actually, a lot of things in Europe are made of limestone. And so if those get lost because they dissolve under the impacts of acid rain, that's a pretty big deal. And then a couple other direct damage to human health. Small particle sulfates and nitrates can actually penetrate deep into your lungs, and that can give you asthma and bronchitis. But I found one positive. Some peat bogs, because peat bogs release a lot of methane, they actually produce less methane when they're affected by acid rain. And so there's maybe one possible benefit. Okay, so you need to be able to talk about direct and indirect effects, right? So the direct effects, and I would be able to discuss it in coniferous forests and in aquatic ecosystems, and then the indirect effects. So in the aquatic ecosystems, you definitely get the toxic effects on the fish, and in the coniferous forest, you're going to get both the indirect toxic and indirect nutrient effects. All right,